This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Sound Porter Mastering, OWC, Atom Audio, API Audio, Jay-Z Microphones, Spectra 1964, and Isotope. In fact, you're hearing my voice right now through the Jay-Z pop filter on the Jay-Z BB29 microphone, through the Spectra 1964 STX600 mic pre-complementer, and Isotope RX and Ozone, all recorded safely onto an OWC Mercury Extreme Pro 6G SSD. So get ready to rock.
With mixing, a lot of what we do is there's a lot of automation. There's a lot of fader rides, and there's a lot of swells, and there's decrescendos. And the thing is, the dialogue, what's being said always has to lead. I can never get in the way of the dialogue. I'm constantly listening to the dialogue, and I have that on a fader, and I'm always muting it, unmuting it, and checking it to make sure that's what's happening in the music isn't overtaking the story that's being told.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio.
When I master a song, I'm immersed and committed to its sonic fidelity from start to beyond finished. Hi, I'm Brian Murphy of Sound Porter Mastering. My goal in every master is to help you prepare so that you're not compromising your timeline, budget, or your mix. My iterative process helps build a relationship with you so that you don't have to ever second-guess your mix. Let's pull back the curtains on mastering because there's no secrets here. Send me your mix and I'll give you free feedback or a free mastered demo. Just hit me up at soundporter.com.
Whether you're in the studio or working remotely, the Envoy Pro FX from OWC lets you record from anywhere with confidence, pushing USB technology bandwidth to the max of 2,800 megabytes per second over Thunderbolt. Transfer tracks in seconds and take your sessions with you anywhere you go. Built for the road, the OWC Envoy Pro FX is waterproof, dustproof, and crushproof. Find the new Envoy Pro FX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rock. Stars. Jay-Z Mics brings you the ultimate futuristic pop filter for your studio, built from solid metal parts that won't break and a flexible gooseneck for easy placement. The Jay-Z pop filter uses a unique waveguide design that prevents plosives from getting through to the mic while allowing important high frequencies for clarity. Plus, it looks super cool and you're hearing my voice on it right now. Use the limited time coupon ROCKSTARS to get 20% off this amazing pop filter from jzmic.com. Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw. Welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Scott Michael Smith, a Grammy-nominated mixer, producer, and musician based in Los Angeles, working largely in music for the screen, but also in the studio working with artists and bands, and we're going to talk about that. Scott got his start at the legendary Village recording studio in Los Angeles, where he became a staff engineer, working with artists like John Mayer, Keith Emerson, Colbie Caillat, Carole King, Fink, and many others. He spent countless hours in the studio learning from guys like Ed Cherney, John Alagia, and T-Bone Burnett while honing his own skills as an engineer-producer. For over a decade, Scott has been one of Hollywood's most in-demand film music mixers, recording and mixing scores for projects like The Revenant, The Handmaid's Tale, It Chapter 2, Minions, The Invisible Man, and many more. Recently, Scott completed work on Mank, the new David Fincher period piece featuring the music of Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross of Nine Inch Nails. The entire score was done in isolation during the pandemic. Scott is known for his ability to bridge the gap between modern film scoring and record production, helping to create a sound that serves what's happening on the screen while creating an immersive and rewarding listening experience at the same time. Scott has also recently composed music for Marvel 616, a behind-the-scenes look at the history of Marvel, streaming now on Disney+. So thanks so much also to Andres Evelis at Jay-Z Microphones for making our introduction. I'm excited today to talk about recording and mixing music from the studio to the orchestral hall on the show today with Scott. So please welcome Scott Michael Smith to Recording Studio Rockstars. Scott, are you ready to rock, my man?
I'm ready to rock.
Dude, it's great to have you here. It's a pleasure
to be here.
To meet you. And man, it's been a lot of fun listening to your music, both the studio stuff with bands, but also these incredible soundtracks you've been working on.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. It's a fun little world we live in over here in Hollywood TV and film land, and it's a little different, but it's musically it's incredible.
Well, we're always curious about it. I mean, I think a lot of us listening are making music and making records in studios, but there's something really intriguing about the images you see of guys like you, where you're like the console's like 50 feet long and there's four or five people working all at once. So yep. I'm really excited about that. And then also Rockstars, of course, we've got a playlist put together so you can go check out Scott's work. There's both some YouTube clips where you can go watch trailers from the films, and then also a lot of the music is in a Spotify playlist that we've got in the show notes. So make sure to click through there. So Scott, I've read your introduction, but tell us more in your own words about how you got started in music. How'd you get interested in this stuff and end up where you are now?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I grew up playing music, drums, guitar, that kind of thing. Went to school in Santa Barbara for a few years. I grew up in LA. Went to my first couple years of college in Santa Barbara. Then I transferred to Berkeley in Boston. And I didn't do the recording program, even though I had this dream of becoming a record producer. And the reason for it was just a matter of time and economics. I basically was like, okay, if I transfer and I've got 2 years to get in and out. And there was a music program at Berkeley called professional music, which is kind of, if I'm being completely honest, somewhat of a bullshit degree. It's a little bit like, I keep telling people it was a cafeteria degree where you go down the line and you pick what you want, and then as long as you pay for your meal at the end, they they stamp your certificate.
Right.
And truthfully, it was like the best thing for me because I was able to take classes and learn all these things that I wouldn't have learned had I done a recording program.
Well, it can't be any worse than the program I went through, which was called Recording Industry. What was it called? Recording Industry Management or something like that.
Right.
So when you left and got out of school, you went to go get a rim job.
Nice.
Sorry, rock stars. But go ahead. Yeah, I mean, Berkeley's a wonderful place.
Yeah, it's incredible. And what was so great is, like, in retrospect, had I done the recording program, I would have been, I think, a little bit pigeonholed into just the recording or production things. And instead of that, I've got training in, jazz harmony. I've got training in, what at the time was called music synthesis, which is, synth programming. And there's arranging courses. There's all these different things that are, wildly musical, but don't really have anything to do with the actual recording process itself, that at the time I was stoked to be taking, but didn't really see how it would help me. And funny enough, it's like, here we are however many years later. And it's the best thing I could have done, because all those classes and everything I did still come into play today, because now I'm sitting at a console, but while I'm at a console, I've got a score in front of me. So it's, it's a little bit, there's a bit of a conservatory vibe to what I do. And I'm thankful I did it that way.
So you learned how to read a score like that in school, or did you learn a whole lot more once you got out of school?
95% once I got out of school. I went through Berkeley as a drummer. They let me kind of moonlight as a guitarist as well, because that's my main instrument, but I don't have formal training on it. So I had the basics. I can read music, I can read rhythms, but as far as reading a score, it's, you're looking at a whole page of all these different parts playing at once. And it's, it's the same thing multiplied by a bunch of different lines, but it was intense when I started doing it. And luckily I had that foundation of my education to fall back on. And then, so when I finished at Berkeley, I moved back home to LA. And even though I wasn't a recording major, which took some convincing for the owner of the studio, Jeff Greenberg, I just kept bugging him and calling him, saying, hire me. Come on, hire me, dude.
I love stories like that.
Yeah. And he eventually was, all right, if I don't hire this kid, he's just going to keep calling every day. So he did indeed hire me. I became a runner. And what was cool, and the way Jeff runs that studio, is that at night, if there's no sessions going on in those rooms, you can stay as late as you want and run signal flow, learn the consoles, learn Pro Tools, learn the gear.
And this was at Village?
This was at the Village, yeah. So my first year as a runner, I just stayed up every night, teaching myself, learning from my colleagues, learning from people I was working with, but, getting coffee by day and just patching stuff in and trying not to blow things up at night.
Nice, man. What's the history behind the name of the village? Do you know anything about that?
You know what? I don't. I know the history of the studio pretty well, which is, it's got a pretty storied past, but I don't know the history of the name.
What does it look like, when you just sort of see the outside?
So it's a large green, yellow, and brick building from the 1920s. It was built as a Masonic temple.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then, I think it was that up until the mid 60s, at which point the Maharishi, the guy the Beatles used to follow around, made it his LA center for transcendental meditation.
Wow. So do you still hear mantras just kind of floating through the walls?
You know what? If it's late enough and you're tired enough, sure thing. So then in the late 60s, I want to say 67 or 68, the heir to the Hormel chili fortune, Geordie Hormel, who was a musician, wanted to open a studio, and he bought this building, turned it into a studio. And then, I think Steely Dan did a bunch of Asia there. That kind of started putting the place on the map. And since then, it's just been, truly one of the most remarkable studios in the world.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, Bill Schnee was on the podcast not too long ago.
Oh, cool.
Talking about making that record as well.
Yeah, of course.
Well, now there were some pretty cool names of people that you worked there. So Ed Cherney, John Alagia, and T-Bone Burnett. What are some of the things that you remember learning from those guys when you were working at the Village?
So, Ed, who unfortunately passed away last year, was a true mentor for me, and I worked with him a ton. And the thing with Ed, other than being just the most badass engineer who could get the best drum sounds you've ever heard in about 30 seconds,
right?
His whole approach to the studio was just keep it relaxed. It doesn't mean he didn't take anything seriously. He took his job very seriously, but his entire, you never saw him panic. And I would walk away from those sessions being like, okay, with someone else who I was assisting, that may have gone south. That may have gotten a little hairy, a little dicey. And Ed was always just kind of cool as a cucumber. And there were times where, we'd be tracking something and he'd go, you know what, let's do a rough mix. Let's flip the whole console over into mix mode and let's pull all the mics. And the band's still there, clearly ready to do another overdub potentially. And he was like, you know what, if they want to record something, we'll figure it out and we'll set it back up. It was just so much stay in that creative space and keep moving forward, but do it with a relaxed attitude, which I think that's extremely important for everybody in the room.
Mm-hmm. So wait, you're saying he would say, pull the patches and tear that down. And if we need to do it again, we'll just set it back up again?
Yeah, it was essentially we'd be tracking a band and then he would be, okay, let's flip, in those rooms, 2 of those rooms have Neve 88Rs. So it's, you literally can switch mode on the console and pull a bunch of patches and make it now available for mixing.
Yeah.
And, I would look at him and be like, are you sure? The band's still here. They might want to record something. He goes, if they want to record something, we'll figure it out.
That's great. Yeah.
So
that is stressful. I'm always terrified to tear it all apart.
Totally. So. And it was just that idea that, it's not precious. If we need to get another guitar sound, we'll get another guitar sound.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay. So what about, and what do you remember learning about the drums? How do you get a killer drum sound in 30 seconds?
Start with
a great drummer?
Yeah, you start with a great drummer, great drums, great room, great microphones, great engineer, right? It's kind of in that order. I don't know really what specifically I learned from Ed other than, he had pretty straightforward miking techniques, but it's just the ears, his ability to pop on an EQ on a kick drum and just get rid of the mud, get the thing punchy, get the thing, sitting right within a matter of seconds was amazing. So it was really, with him, it was a matter of speed and ease. And then he was able to achieve this kind of incredible separation in things. And, with him, it was just watching him do it so quickly was incredible. And it's funny, someone else I worked with once, we spent about a month together and I learned an insane amount from, and I'll gladly admit I was a horrible assistant and didn't know at all what I was doing at this time, but was Joe Ciccarelli.
Oh,
and
great.
We did one album together and I got thrown into that and I wasn't prepared. And Joe was so sweet and so gracious. But either way, I came out of that a month later like I just had the best masterclass ever.
Did he kick your ass gently?
He did. Yeah, that's exactly what he did. He kicked my ass just enough, but he was sweet and kind the whole time.
That's great, man. Well, sorry, I'm going to keep asking you an Ed question about drums. I'm a little stuck on drums for some reason.
Yeah,
but
we all are, aren't we?
When you describe him as working quickly, you talked about the EQ. How often would you see him like jump up out of the chair, or anybody for that matter, and run out to adjust the mics and move it? Or was it more like, just a smart starting placement, and then it's all about how it, it's techniques on the control side?
It's the latter, and it's not even a lot of techniques. It's simple stuff, right? It's a pair of stereo overheads, it's a pair of stereo room mics, a kick out, a snare top, some 421s on the toms maybe. But there's not, his input lists didn't have a bunch of processing. It was just place the mic in a really good spot. I mean, he would go out and listen, as any good engineer is going to do. You got to hear what you're recording. And that was pretty much it. It was just the ability to dial things in quickly. There was no kind of smokescreen or like, I'm going to put all this gear on here to get this sound. It was just that ability to bring it up really fast. And Joe Ciccarelli, same thing when we did that record. It's this idea that I think my generation, the younger generation, we start out afraid to EQ things and afraid to color things. Whereas guys like Ed or Joe and, these kind of legendary engineers and producers, they're mixing right from the start. It's no, let's get this. Let's not figure out what we can do with this later. Let's make this sound good. And, we'll throw away a few of the warm-up takes and those will be the rough mixes. So I was just watching those guys do that. And, by the time you're tracking the first song, you're like, wow, this could go to radio, Yeah.
Well, I wonder if part of that is just the fact that so many of us are growing up now with, the first tools we have access to in a studio. I remember, I just had a Pro Tools Digio 1 and it had that mic pre-input. I don't think I had any external mic pre's yet.
Right.
And I just put a SM7 into it and I'd just go. So it was like, I didn't have EQ on the way in as often, So I wonder if that's a little bit of it too, is just growing up with this idea is, I'll have EQ is for a plug-in and therefore I'll do it later.
I think it's that. And I think it's also, the other two parts of it are, I think it's experience and confidence. And then I think the second thing is that it's also comes out of necessity. It took me a while to wrap my head around when I started assisting, like why we were recording a session with 30 mics, but only printing to 22 tracks in Pro Tools. Mm-hmm. And then it was like, oh, right. Okay. They sum the kick together. They sum the snare together because they are used to working on 24 track and you don't have that many channels. Right. And that's how those guys came up. So that idea of, you could put 3 mics on the kick, but you end up in Pro Tools or on tape with just a kick track. There's a commitment that's made there, and that comes from, I think, experience and confidence.
Yeah, well, Dark Side of the Moon, all the drums are on 4 tracks, I think.
Yeah, there you go, right?
Stereo overheads, kick, snare.
Yep.
The Spectra 1964 BBDI passive direct box is perfect for recording deep bass that will make your mixes sound huge. Plug that into a C610 comp limiter, and as founder Bill Cheney points out, it'll move your pant leg. But what if you want to record direct keyboards? Spectra 1964 now offers the stereo BBDI 2 with custom wound high Z transformers for big headroom, virtually flat response, and a 15 dB input pad at spectra1964.com. You may already know that iZotope creates the very best smart plugins for mixing and mastering. But did you know that now you can get them all through iZotope's new affordable subscription bundles? Get Music Production Suite Pro for only $24.99 per month or Producers Club for only $19.99 per month. Start your 7-day free trial subscription now or go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Coupon not valid for subscriptions or Spire Studio. Okay, cool. So now John Alagia, tell us about him.
So John is a producer who when I was there, had a room at the Village as well. So Ed had a studio at the Village and so did John. And John, I assisted on a few records. The engineer and mixer he was working with at the time was Brian Schubel, who's a great, great mixer. And with those guys, it was kind of a similar thing. There was very much a relaxed atmosphere, but get the work done. But John just has this ability to, he's one of those guys who will listen to a part go down and just ask the bass player after a couple times, like, hey, let's try the A flat there. And just in his head without knowing necessarily what key it's in, his pitch is incredible and his musicality is amazing.
Wow.
But at the same time, he'll let the song be found, let them play, not immediately start yelling out notes. But if he wants to go, okay, hey, you played, there was a B flat on top of that chord. Can we try that differently next time? Just those kinds of things. It was kind of amazing to watch. You're watching this like musical superhuman.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. One of my mentors, Brad Jones, would call out about this, hit the seventh and stuff. I'm like, how do you know that's the seventh?
Yeah. I mean, what's really amazing is like, and we can talk about this later, but in the film scoring world, it's the height of the musicianship of some of these composers to have the ability to do that to entire sections of orchestra.
Yeah, pick out one violin playing a single note.
Exactly. Or, just making these orchestrational changes on the fly when you've got 75 people in the room and it just sounds incredible. And it's pretty amazing to watch.
Yeah, I find myself, I can hear when something doesn't sound right to me, but then I have to say, hang on, everybody. And then I'm soloing all kinds of things until I identify it.
Right. Yeah, no, it's a musicianship that I wish I had more of.
Yeah. What's your instrument again? You drums, studying?
Guitar's my main instrument.
Right. So are you playing a lot still and trying to sort of, move forward your own musicianship during all this other stuff you're doing?
I am. And to be frank, with the pandemic, with so much time at home, I've been playing more guitar than I've played maybe my entire life, which has been great. It's been I've been fortunate to have a busy year, but at the same time in the evenings when it's quiet, I'm like, all right, I'm just going to play guitar for 2 hours. Because I'm not going to many, mostly electric.
Nice.
Yeah, mostly electric, and just crank it up in my studio, and it's been a blast, and I've been doing that pretty regularly lately, and it's been great.
Now, do you like to mic it up and listen to it back through the speakers in the control room, or do you just sort of go out to the big room with the amp?
I would love to do that, but because I'm at home, and it's just me playing for fun, I'm plugged into my interface and going DI, and I've been using actually Overloud has this THU guitar amp and pedal emulation program that's like incredible.
Cool.
I was using Guitar Rig forever, and it was cool, and it got me by. But then I found this thing, and I'm like, wow, this sounds pretty realistic.
That's cool. Yeah, it's fun when you find guitar simulators that really get you excited about it.
Yeah, I've got an AC30 in my living room, but my wife might have other thoughts if I were to plug into that.
Those tend to sound pretty good when they're pretty loud.
They do.
Okay, and then T-Bone Burnett. So,
Yeah, so T-Bone,
cool.
T-Bone has tracked so many records at the Village over the years, and I was fortunate to be an assistant on a few of those. His engineer is a guy named Mike Piersone, who's incredible. And with those guys, it's same thing. It's kind of, getting sounds quickly, incredible musicianship. But with T-Bone, what I was able to observe was it was a matter of setting a vibe in the room and making everybody comfortable. So, whether that literally means dimming the lights and chilling everybody out, it's partly that. But at the same time, with T-Bone, you watch, he can take any project and just really knows the right musicians to pick and put around the artist. And he generally works with guys that have, they can play straightforward rock and roll, no problem, but that's not what they want to do, and that's not what they will be doing. So it's guys like Jay Bellerose, for instance, on drums, who always bring something really interesting. It'll be a calfskin drum set, things like that. Guitar, some of the records I was on, he was working with Mark Rebo at the time, who's, played on all the Tom Waits albums. So there's just this curation that happens on his sessions from what I was able to observe that just puts the right people in the right frame of mind in the right space and just let the magic happen.
Well, I remember one of the quotes I heard about T-Bone Burnett was suggesting that the way to record is to turn the mic pre's up really hot and then play really quietly.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And every once in a while I try that out myself. I think I was just playing drums, even with my phone. I was recording my phone and I said wonder what would happen if I just turned the gain way up to where it was clearly giving me overs And then I just try and play the drums more quietly, and it sounded so much better.
Well, it's amazing, especially with drums. You don't have to smack them to get the tone out. And sometimes the harder you hit them, the more you choke them. So, I remember I did a session for, forget what film it was. It may have been, I think it was G.I. Joe 10 years ago or so. And we did a session with Vinnie Caillat at what was then Ocean Way before it was United. And, Vinny's this legendary drummer, plays with Jeff Beck. He's played with everybody. And he doesn't have a heavy hand. He's got a pretty light touch, but he can still make it, but the drums sound massive because he knows the exact amount of force to use to get tone and articulation out of it, as opposed to just banging away on it, which, I think a lot of us would just assume, that's how you get the drums to sound the best. You hit them as hard as you can.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not always the case,
Yeah, I'm really struck by that. The times where I'm amazed at how good the drums can sound, or any instrument, when you can listen to it in the room without even needing earplugs or headphones on. But then the flip side to that is that there are styles of music that are completely appropriate to hit really loudly, as if we were all on a giant stage.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I think I always think of just a drum sound I love is on Harvest by Neil Young, the first track, Out on the Weekend. And no one's playing loud, but there's just so much tone in the drums and the guitars and everything. And you can tell it's kind of that vibe where you can, it was probably recorded pretty hot, but everyone was just playing lightly. That's how it sounds, at least.
I think that was recorded here at Quad.
Was it?
Nashville. I think so. Yeah, I think
very cool.
Harvest or Harvest Moon.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So, what is what you do? What is this? I got a ton of questions here, but I'll just start with this one. So what is sound design versus recording versus mixing for film?
Sure.
And how is the studio different or the same, for bands and for film scores and things like that?
So it's sound design is a bit ambiguous because within film and TV music, you've got a sound designer whose job it is to design everything from the birds and the wind that you hear when the characters are talking on screen to, the explosion and the car crash. And so that's part of the sound department, which we have to work with them and make sure we're all staying out of each other's way. Right? Because if you've got a scene with let's say it's a big war picture and you've got a scene with a huge explosion, either the explosion is going to work and live there in that, taking up that space in the audio, or the music is, not one or the other.
Right.
So, and that comes down to the final audio mix, which is the step after me mastering, so to say.
Yeah.
For film mixes. But so that's kind of how typical sound design will work. The other interesting aspect of sound design in film is sound design from a musical sense, right? So where it's not actually something on screen, but it's trying to make up a sound that might jump out at the audience that they may not have heard before. And that's really more a kind of a production-y thing than anything. And then I'm trying to remember the second part of the question.
I guess it was the recording aspect of it. Mostly I'm just looking for a breakdown of these different elements of what goes in. When we go watch one of your film trailers, it sounds big and wonderful and we get pulled right into the story, but there's a lot of aspects. There's sound design, there's dialogue, there's the recording session, there's the mixing.
Sure.
And then you just said mastering. So I didn't even know that was a term.
Yeah, it's a little bit misleading. We do get soundtracks mastered, but there's also what's called the dub, which is the final audio mix of the film. So essentially, we can kind of go macroscopically, and trailers specifically that's a whole different world.
Right.
Those guys. So I actually generally, I don't know that I've ever worked on a trailer. Those guys are generally like one dude that's just incredible at all of it. But as far as a film mix or a TV mix, the way it'll work is you've got all the different audio departments working at the same time. So you've got the sound department and the music department, and they're all working towards that deadline at the end, which is the final audio mix where everything gets put together.
Which is the dub. That's called the dub.
That's the dub mix, exactly. And those are done on dub stages, which are movie theaters with consoles in them.
Right. That's the big giant one with 10 people on the console.
Exactly. Whereas the scoring stage is more of a traditional studio. It's just massive because it can house an orchestra. So basically, sound effects, sound design, Foley, ADR, all these different kind of audio components of a movie are happening simultaneously, and we don't really pay attention to them other than how it works in the the cut of the film that we have that we're working against.
Mm-hmm.
So we generally don't get involved in that. Our lane is just music. So what'll happen with scoring something is the composer will have been working with the director and the filmmaker for a period of time. It could be a couple weeks, it could be a year, working on demos and trying to kind of figure out a sound for the film. Then once the movie's shot and it's in editing and all his demos are approved, his or her demos, we kind of begin the pre-production process of figuring out, okay, so where are we going to record this thing? Is it all orchestra? Is it orchestra and rhythm section? Is it all synth? Is it synth and orchestra? There's so many different palettes within films, which is fun. So you then figure out the logistics of that and have the artistic conversation of, okay, what are we going for? What's the movie going for? And how do we reflect that in the music?
Yeah.
It then really becomes my job to take what the composer's done and has worked so hard on and help him or her realize it into a recording and no longer just kind of a MIDI demo.
Yeah.
And that's done. So if we just say, for the example, to make it easy, let's say it's orchestra and rhythm section, we'll just start scheduling sessions and start booking players. So it might be 5 days of scoring with an orchestra and 2 days of rhythm section, in which case we would do 5 days. If it was here in town, we do Fox or Sony or Warner Brothers. And then we might do those 2 days at Capitol or the Village or East West or one of those, more traditional tracking room. Mm-hmm. So once that's all recorded, we fortunately have a lot of wizards here in Los Angeles and all over the world who are incredible at editing and comping and tightening things up, because the track counts that we work with are can be pretty mind-boggling.
Boggle us.
Yeah, okay, all right, I'll boggle you. So let's assume this is kind of, I'll give you one of the more extreme examples. Let's assume we're recording a big action movie and it's got this massive kind of 6-minute cue towards the end of the film, and there's all this different stuff going on. Let's say it starts out with drums and an acoustic guitar, and then the orchestra comes in, and right there, so the orchestral session will probably have about 50 mics.
Wow.
And then you've got, if you've got 15 drum mics and you've got 2 guitar mics, whatever. So right there is, you can easily get it to 100 tracks, no problem. Where it gets really interesting is when we're working with an orchestra, we may want to stripe things out, meaning in the room, you've got your string section, you've got your brass, you've got your horns, you've got your woodwinds, and you've got your percussion. In the mix, I might want separate control over those sections. So, and we can get it with spot mics, but the cleanest way to get it, and it's not necessarily the most fun way to get it, especially for the musicians, but it helps a lot with the mix, is we may say, okay, just the strings record this cue. Great.
Yeah.
Now just the brass, now just the horns, now just the woodwinds. And we're taking those 50 mics every single time because they're all in the same room. So if awesome. if we do 10 passes, that's 500 tracks right there.
If you're ready to upgrade your studio to the famous sound of API's large format consoles, then you're ready for The Box, a small format console featuring the same analog circuitry and original 2520 op-amp design that has made API famous for 50 years. Record through 8 world-class mic pre-channels, mix through 24 smooth-as-glass faders, and upgrade your home studio to legendary status. API now offers a virtual console experience, allowing you to get a personalized online demo of The Box at apiaudio.com. Atom Audio can provide all your monitor needs needs. Whether you are setting up a first-time home studio for recording music or podcasts, or a world-class studio for professional mixing and mastering, their unique accelerated ribbon tweeter design is famous for creating smooth, detailed imaging that let your speakers disappear into your music, allowing you to focus on the mix. Learn how to set up your studio monitors and control room for great sound, plus lots of other cool studio tips at adam-audio.com/education. Yeah, so we just talked about that. Adam Greenspan was on, and we were talking about making records that way. I think that was what we were talking about. And it's that idea of sometimes you record the drums and then you record the cymbals separate, so you have that control. It's cool to hear that same analogy can work for an orchestral stage as well.
Yeah, it does, and it's and depending on what the score is, sometimes you need that. If it's a really traditional, somewhat, we'll say John Williams-y score, even though no one is John Williams-y but John Williams. Be clear about that. Mm-hmm. You'd hopefully just record the orchestra all playing together in the room, and you do single takes, right? If it's something that's more modern, and there's going to be a bunch of other elements like drums and synths and musical sound design and all these other things going on, then you're going to want that control. So it's not uncommon for me to get a session to mix or me to record something, and I open it up and my HD3 system can't play it back.
Yeah, I'll bet.
So sometimes we'll need, 2 Pro Tools systems printing to one machine. I'm personally a fan of just bouncing things down. Right. So if I've got a basic balance for the orchestra, we print a live mix as we're taking it, and maybe that's all I need is that live mix. So that would be a 5-channel or a 6-channel mix, depending on if we're in 5.0 or 5.1. But it's a lot of all this to say it's a lot of track management, and the Pro Tool sessions, if you don't have a good approach to it, can be pretty daunting.
I bet you were happy to see folder tracks come along.
Oh my God, it's been incredible.
Now, I can't remember, but will folder tracks let you commit that track and then so you can unzip it and kind of remix it after?
They will, yeah. There's the basic folder option, which is just an organizational tool. But then what's really great is the routing folder options. Right. So you can actually process on the folder, then commit it. And if it's a 5.1 routing folder, it just gives you a 5.1 audio track, and that's the sum of everything that's in there. And then that starts opening up your voices too, and you can actually get your machine working and start mixing.
That's pretty exciting. I could almost see us all sort of adopting that even for making band records, where it's like, you know what, let's just commit to a drum sound and
totally,
and then not really change it and just keep working, and unless we absolutely have to go back and change something.
Yeah, exactly. It's an interesting idea, especially if you're doing, if you're tracking things in parts and remotely, like so many of us are these days. You can commit to a drum sound, send that out, and then just start sculpting things around that.
Very cool. And then I'm sure that Universe View in Pro Tools, which I'm always like, what is this thing? Get it out of my way. You're probably like, it's made for you. It's how you manage 150 tracks.
You'd think so, but I totally don't use it. I am still, I'm just in the edit window all day. Yeah. I don't look at the mix window very much because I can't see, there's too many tracks and the track names don't display well enough. And for me, it's just like, there's with so many tracks, looking at regions, you can see where things come in and where they go out. And so you can tell where you need to start working and, what's coming and what's going.
That's sort of how I've always felt too. For some reason, I've never gravitated over to the mix window. My brain gets confused trying to say which track is which fader.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the nice thing about digital, right? Is it gives us this heads up of what's coming.
Yeah.
Which we wouldn't normally get on an analog console. And with that many tracks, it's easier just to be able to look at the window and look ahead and say, okay, I see there's a massive orchestral blast coming, so I better, check that out and figure out what the rest of the track needs to be doing to make room for that.
Who needs to listen anymore? We'll just look at the screen.
Just look at the screen. Totally. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Let's see. I may have skipped forward pretty quickly, but you started at Village, you're working with these people, and then next thing you know, you're mixing these incredible movies, Rockstars. We've put together a great couple of playlists for you. We've got an audio playlist, Spotify, and then of course a YouTube playlist. Movies like The Revenant, The Handmaid's Tale, It, and Mank one that we're going to talk about too. So really amazing stuff. What was the transition for you to be able to start doing all this stuff?
So it was, I guess part of it's right time, right place. While I was a staff engineer at the Village, I started working with a local band, producing their record. And this is kind of a classic LA entertainment industry thing where the lead singer also happened to be the assistant to the head of music at Paramount Pictures at the time. And it was his band, right? It was a bunch of guys that were fresh out of college. And so we were tracking at the Village, and we were doing things like, to save them money, it was like tracking on Christmas and stuff like that. Days the studio should have been closed, we were able to just, talk them into, hey, let us go in. You don't need to send in staff, because I was on staff, and it was like, let them do it for cheap. The building's closed otherwise. So we were doing their record, and after, I don't know, a couple different sessions, the lead singer was like, my boss has a studio at his house that we could probably cut vocals in. He told me we could use it. I was like, oh, interesting. Who's your boss? And his boss is a guy by the name of Randy Spenlove, who's the head of music at Paramount Pictures. And nice. So we started going to Randy's house, and sure enough, Randy had a studio set up that was kind of an overdub room. So it was, he had some nice mics, a couple 1073s, and a Pro Tools system. And so we started cutting vocals there, and that's where I met Randy. And Randy started asking me to record some things here and there because he was kind of looking for an engineer. And because while he's a film executive and a music executive, he's a music producer in his own right, and a killer guitar player. So Randy started calling me for things, and then Randy started calling me from the office for things. Hey, Paramount has this thing coming up. We need to do a guitar overdub for this thing. We need to do drums for this thing. And I just started saying, yeah, of course, sure. And, I was getting, it was, what's your day rate? And I'm like, I don't know. What should my day rate be? Like, I was completely lost.
You're like, and will you feed me?
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I don't know, enough to get there and back with gas. So they started, hiring me for things, and that kind of snowballed. And then before you know it, Randy calls me. He goes, hey, just checking. You can record an orchestra, right? To which I'd done some quartets here and there and some string dates, but nothing crazy. Certainly not a 65-piece orchestra at a scoring stage.
Yeah.
But I was like, yeah, of course. Sure. Of course I can, I then, went home and freaked out for the next 3 weeks trying to figure out what I was going to do and how I was not going to get, found out to be a complete phony with no idea what he was doing. So, what I did is I just kind of approached it like a drum kit, and did a lot of reading and a lot of just learning about orchestral recording, and kind of, winged it. And I'd be interested to go back now and listen to those recordings. I'm sure they were fine. I'm sure they weren't stellar, but the client was super happy.
Yeah.
It sounded like an orchestra, which is what they wanted, and on top of it, I should say, with scoring stages in LA, you have an entire crew that you're working with to make the thing happen because there's so many parts. So that session was at Warner Brothers, and the stage crew at Warner Brothers, who are now dear friends and colleagues that I work with all the time, they must have known that I was a little out of my depths, and they didn't let on though. And they were so supportive and so nice, and were, hey, maybe you should try putting this mic here, try that. So it was very much a fake it till you make it kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then, I recorded that thing, and then it started getting more and more calls for orchestra. And, that was probably coming up on 15 years ago. So
it's a great lesson too. It's this reminder, and that goes for all of us. And I'm sure you've been in the shoes in reverse too, where when you learn that when you're working with somebody else who may be out of their depth, or anybody for that matter, you make it your number one goal to make that person that you're working for look as good as possible. That's an attitude I like to have in the studio as well.
I think that's right. And I think it's, everything in the studio is so much better when it's a collaboration.
Yeah.
And if someone isn't quite there yet, or if someone, it's a really, I try to do this whenever I'm in a studio and someone's working for me as a second. I don't sit there and judge the person by where they are in their career or their skill set. It's okay. He or she maybe has a deficit here. We can talk about it, and I can be like, hey, next time let's do this. But be constructive in your criticism and be, help people, because I think the more we help each other, the more we can all kind of succeed. So I always took, when I was assisting, there were guys, and there's plenty of them who were just, dicks, right? There's just some guys that come into a studio and they're just a total asshole right off the bat. And all that does to me personally is go like, all right, well, I'm going to work about half as hard for you because I just never want to work with you again. Versus other guys who are just, they don't even have to be overly nice. They just have to be courteous, decent human beings, in which case you're going, all right, I'm going to try to make this guy have the best and easiest experience in this recording studio to make him look good, make him, make things sound good, bring him back next time. We can keep working together, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just that like decency in the studio is important. And there are times where people don't quite know what they're doing. And I think it's beneficial to help them out instead of call them out.
Yeah. Do you ever pick up sometimes somebody comes in and it's like a combination of they seem to have an idea that they feel strongly about, but yet they're also sort of nervously apologetic about asking you for that change?
Yeah, totally. And I whenever that happens, it's funny. You hear the word I'm sorry a lot.
Right.
They'll put out an idea like, I'm sorry, we don't have to try that. And I'll be the first person to look at them and go, what are you sorry about? Let's try it. It could be great.
Yeah.
I think, a lot of people are kind of trigger shy in the studio, and it can be an intimidating experience, especially if you're new to it, but that doesn't invalidate your creativity.
Yeah, I can feel that way with mastering engineers sometimes. I'll be like, send over something, and if something doesn't sound right, I might ask for a change, but I feel nervous about asking for it because maybe my mix just sucked in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, it's that's also about, like, with mastering, finding someone you love working with, right? Because finding someone that will take constructive criticism and will take your notes into effect and not let it bruise their ego right away.
iZotope is a secret weapon for your studio that can help you get consistently pro-sounding mixes. And now you can get access to all their plugins through the new subscription options. Only $24.99 per month, Music Production Suite Pro is designed for the serious recording, mixing, and mastering engineer, putting the finishing touches on music, film, and podcasts with fully pro versions of Ozone, RX, Neutron, Nectar, Neoverb, Tonal Balance Control, Visual Mixer, and much more, including free plugin updates. Or for only $19.99 per month, you can join Producers Club to get a suite of industry-leading production, mixing, and mastering plugins, custom presets, royalty-free samples, production courses, and more. Start your 7-day free trial subscription now or go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Coupon not valid for subscriptions or Spire Studio. The Spectra 1964 Custom Shop now offers the STX-100D, the big brother to the now famous STX-100, a fully discrete mic pre with dual transformer isolated Spectra 101 amplifiers. The STX-100D is exactly the same original circuit found in Stax, Ardent, Advision, A&M, and Record Plant recording consoles. The sonic performance is identical. Best of all, it will plug into a single space of your standard 500 lunchbox. And if you want to add the sound of the famous Spectra C610 comp limiter, then check out the new STX600 modules, combining the STX100 mic pre and C610 in a single 500 module. That's how you're hearing my voice. Now you can get that same incredible sound in your studio that worked for famous producers like Tom Dowd with the STX mic pre's, BBDI, and comp limiters. Go to Spectra1964.com or call 801-797-0642. Whether you're in the studio or working remotely, the Envoy Pro FX from OWC lets you record from anywhere with confidence. It pushes USB technology bandwidth to the max of 2,800 megabytes per second over Thunderbolt, giving you high-speed audio data and recording and playback. Transfer tracks in seconds and take your sessions with you anywhere you go. Built for the road, the OWC Envoy Pro FX is waterproof, dustproof, and crushproof. Creativity without limits, only from OWC. Imagine never having to worry about your external drive interface again or compatibility from studio to studio. Find the new Envoy Pro FX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Scott Michael Smith, joining us from LA, talking about making records with bands in the studio, but also talking about making these incredible film soundtracks. So we'll jump right in for the second half. Scott, you ready to jam?
Let's do it.
All right, man. So you were talking about orchestral recording, fake it till you make it, go in and just say, I can do it, and then be like, oh my God, how am I going to do this?
Yep.
Do you remember studying any of Al Schmidt's techniques at that point? Because I've heard a lot of people talk about his techniques for that as well.
At that point, no. I mean, of course, extremely aware of Al, and he's Al. He's the best. But mostly, with Al, I think so much of what he's known for is, well, I shouldn't pigeonhole Al Schmidt, but technique-wise, I think a lot of what people look to Al for is big band recording. As well as string section recording on record dates and things. Whereas with film, we spend more time, not so much at a place like Capitol or Ocean Way, but we spend more time on the Eastwood stage at Warner Brothers, which is, or Sony or Fox, they all have stages as well. They're rooms that are sound stages, the size of a studio lot soundstage. So it's more, I guess it's just to say it's a larger atmosphere than Al is often working in.
Okay.
So therefore it's a bit of a different approach. So the approach that kind of is really popular is something that you could see almost on like on Beatles records, like things that were recorded, the orchestral parts that were recorded at Abbey Road Studio 1, Decca Trees, miking like that, stuff that really became popular. That's stuff we get to do. Exactly.
Yeah. Now I've heard it said that one of the things Al might have tried was using more Omni mics because when you're bringing things up spot mics, maybe the same answer you just gave, where it's like different size, so different sort of parameters to the physics of sound in there. But do you find yourself using Omni mics more often than directional mics for these soundstage recordings? Or
yes.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, just to be honest, pretty much anything Al's going to do is going to sound good in any room because he's Al Schmidt and his ears are insane, right? You put him in a closet, you put him at Dodger Stadium, it's all going to sound great. But to that end, yeah, I mean, pickup patterns on microphones with orchestral recording are really, really interesting. If you're in an ideal space, which would be a scoring stage, an Omni is really great. Almost all of my room mics, Decatree mics, my wide mics, any of my room mics, my surround mics are going to be an Omni because I want as much of that ambience as possible, because this is a room that's been designed specifically for that.
And it sounds great already.
It sounds great already. And then, essentially like my orchestral recording setup and like many is the best way to think about it is kind of levels of focus. So we kind of zoom out and zoom in. So if we start with something like the traditional Decatree, I'll have that, and then I'll have a pair of wide mics. It'll be kind of a wide stereo left, right. I'll then have some surround mics, which are left, right, about 10 feet behind the Decatree. So that's kind of my main room sound. And that's going to pick up the whole room, the whole orchestra. And frankly, that's going to do 75% of the heavy lifting for the sound of the score. Okay. That's pretty much all there. So then and that's all going to be in Omni almost every single time. There are times where I'll work at places like Capitol A, actually is a great example. And that room isn't quite as big. So your wide mics end up back against the wall. So there's nothing really behind them. There's no space.
Mhm.
In which case I'll go for something like a wide cardioid because I don't want the reflection off the wall right behind the microphone.
Right.
But in a larger atmosphere, like a scoring stage, I want everything. I want, yes, there's 25 feet behind the microphone before there's a wall. So I want all that. The next level down for me is kind of an overhead section type thing. So I'll do essentially, think of them, like tall drum overheads. So maybe about 8 feet, and they'll be over the strings. So I'll have, one over the violins, one over the violas, one over the cello. Usually don't do one over the bass. 2 over the woodwinds, 2 over the French horns, 1 or 2 over the brass on the right. And those are usually like around 8 or 9 feet. And then the other mics, the room mics that we just talked about, could be anywhere from 10 to 12 feet.
Now, why 2 for the wind instruments?
It's just because it's well, for the woodwinds, they're almost always in the center of the room. So it's basically just a left and right.
Okay.
And same thing for the French horns or for the brass. It's the number of mics is really dictated by how big your section is, how many players you have.
Mm-hmm.
Because, with scores and with orchestral music, everything's on the page. So the violins have dynamic markings that tell them when to get loud. The brass have dynamic markings that tell them when to get loud, et cetera, et cetera. So if it's well recorded and it's well orchestrated and well written, I don't have to go in later and be like, you know what, we need more flute 2 here. We need more bassoon here. That should happen naturally in the balance. So the overhead mics are there to bring the whole section up or down without bringing up the rest of the room. So if I'll usually use 2, but if I had a really big wind section, I would use 3. I could do like a left, center, right kind of thing. But the idea being that they would all come up together, because if you bring up certain instruments when, you're not bringing up others and they're meant to play together in a section, all of a sudden it's no longer what's written on the page and what was intended in the score. Right. So that's kind of what those are. Those are like almost like spotlight mics. The next level down, that's funny, spotlight, I guess is the wrong word, will be confusing, because the next level down are spot mics, these are mics that will go on individual instruments. If there'll be a spot mic pretty much on every woodwind instrument. I'll put them on stands by the cello. So like the cellos, you'll usually have two cellos to a music stand. Each music stand will have a mic on it. The violins, you might have one in front, one in back of each first and second section. And those will be, maybe 6 feet. So that's in the case of, let's say we have a soloist and I need to bring that soloist out, because there is so much happening in the music. There's so much loud percussion. There's all this stuff happening. Those spot mics allow me to bring out kind of the individual instruments.
Yeah. And how close is a spot mic for a violin, for example? Or a cello?
I would say it's about 6 feet, 6.5 feet for a violin, above them. And, if we have a section of, to be clear, if we have a section of, let's say 18 or 20 violins, so 10 first violins, 10 second violins, that's not 20 mics. I'll use 4 spot mics to get all of that. I'll kind of break it up into quadrants. Mm-hmm. For a cello, it depends. It depends what you're going for. If you're for an orchestral kind of thing where they're playing in a group, it's about 3 feet in front of them, maybe 3.5 feet in front of them, and about chest level. If it's someone that's going to be a true soloist, I might go a little more towards the bridge and a little closer in.
Mm-hmm. And I noticed you use the term cellos and celli. What do I need to know about that?
There's just a bunch of Italian words that get thrown around in orchestral music, and I'm not well versed enough to know really the differences. I know celli is plural cellos.
Right.
That's kind of all that is.
All right, cool.
But for me, I mean, just as a overall recording approach, and this is true of kind of anything I do, but it's especially true with orchestra, is like I want to hear the space the instrument's in almost every single time. Mm-hmm. So if I'm recording an orchestra, obviously there's a lot of room mics, but if I'm recording a vocal, unless they're in a small booth, I generally want a room mic up. Because that's kind of what's always done it for me with records, is kind of being able to close your eyes and visualize the space the actual musician is in.
Yeah. I feel like Steve Albini is one of the first people I saw he put up room mics with a vocal,
Yeah.
and I was like, I just thought it sounded really cool. I'd never even thought to do that before, unless it
Yeah.
happened accidentally on a session.
I think so for me, I mean, yeah, and like, the Pixies record he did, you can hear it. There's so much room on things. And I think a lot of it too is we like it because we're so used to hearing older records with bleed. So you listen to things and you hear what sounds like a room mic, but it's probably not a room mic. It's probably the piano mic, which was 8 feet over from the vocalist, that kind of thing. And that imparts this sense of space onto recordings that to me just makes something real.
Yeah. And I guess another reminder too is in the same way that a close mic could sound really good on a drum, but if you hit the drum really hard, it's not going to sound so good necessarily. I mean, it could.
Right.
In the right situation, it could.
Sure.
But then you want to step back from the kit. Same thing with a vocal. Like a powerful
Yep.
vocal line might sound better step back in listening.
Yeah, totally. And and it comes down to this. Like if you had one mic and you had to record a drum set, you're not putting it on the kick drum, right? You're throwing
Right.
it, it's a room mic somewhere in front of the kit to try to pick up the whole thing so you can get a realistic picture.
Yeah. Or I'll do it in my new favorite spot where it's like right above your knee at the kick drum. It's right about where your knee is. So it's like in front of the kick and side of the snare.
Yep. Yeah,
Compressing.
absolutely.
And I know that vocals can be powerful because when my daughter sings in the car, I have to roll the windows down sometimes to let the sound out.
You know what? Between you and me and everyone listening to this, one of the things I love most about being in the film and TV world is I rarely, unless it's choir, I rarely record lead vocals these days.
Mhm.
It's just you don't hear it much in film score. And I kind of love that because I spent years and years recording vocals, and it's not the easiest thing to do. Recording a really good, clean vocal from a dynamic singer is hard, and it's a really delicate thing. That's not the reason I don't like doing it. The reason I've just always been so much more into tracking drums, tracking guitars, and just the big stuff. That's always excited me more than vocal tracking. So.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I think I'm trying to forever learn to love the vocal even more, because I know it's like the ultimate frontier of the records I make.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and I'm guessing like everything, as we get further down these engineering paths, I'm assuming you're similar to me in that you've figured out that less is generally more.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's why I'm trying to be quiet when I'm doing this interview with you. But let me ask this question. So, recording in the studio, whether it's studio stuff or orchestral stuff, also Andrus Evelis over at Jay-Z Microphones introduced us.
Yeah.
Let's give them a shout out. Are there any particular Jay-Z mics that you've sort of enjoyed using or something you've found really useful on a session?
So yeah, they make a violet mic called the Amethyst, and I've got 3 of the Amethyst vintage, so I can do them in a left, center, right configuration. And yeah, I've been digging them a lot. I mean, they're, I told Andrus this. I was like, it's to me, gear, not always, but the most useful gear kind of emulates a Swiss Army knife, right? Like you buy something, it doesn't do one thing. It can do multiple things. And what's interesting is those mics, they don't have a polar pattern on them. They're just cardioid, but they sound good on so many things. They sound great on vocals. They sound great as drum overheads. I use them. I don't know why, but I just always use them on French horns now. It's become like my French horn section mic for orchestra.
I'm guessing you heard a French horn sound really good through them one day and you're like, okay, that'll work.
Well, it was literally just, hey, let's try these. Let's see how they sound on French horns. And, because we were recording an orchestra and it was like, wow, the horns sound really great. And you're exactly right.
Yeah.
I used them on drum overheads for something I did at Capitol in Studio B at Capitol, which is like, if, that room sounds great already, but you can really tell a good microphone from a bad microphone in a room like that. And yeah, they sounded fantastic. So I use them on a lot of things, and they're cool. They got a great little shock mount, and I'm a fan.
That's cool. And I had a similar experience with the V11, using it on trumpet. So it was a great substitute for a ribbon mic. If you stick it out in front of a brass instrument, I felt like it really kind of warmed up the tone nicely.
Which makes sense when I'm saying I like them on horns. There's something that they do without getting a shrill, piercy top thing that can happen with brass.
So let's talk about that, because that was one of my questions. one of the records or one of the scores you worked on is a film called Mank with Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. And that had some horns in it and stuff like that. And I wanted to ask you, like, how is recording and mixing horns different from strings? And do you just have any tips about horns in general?
Sure. Yeah. Mank is somewhat of its own thing because it was all home recording. But generally, to your question, similar thing, space, right? I love room mics. I love hearing the ambience of a space. So if I'm recording, let's say it's a solo trumpet, a lot of people put the Royer 121 right up on the bell, and that's the sound, and that's a cool thing. There's no doubt about it. But to me, the tube mic that's 8 feet away sounds better. So again, with horns, with brass, and this is true whether it's orchestral or whether it's salsa or whether it's a pop thing, there's such insanely loud instruments most of the time that the sound travels to develop. So if you're 8 feet away, it's gonna sound better on a microphone than it will a foot away. Trumpet to me always sounds small if you're right at the bell. It sounds kind of thin, and that can be useful and that can be cool. But space is certainly your friend with brass. And so for me, I like, if I'm working in a studio that's got a killer mic list, I love like an M50, like a Neumann M50, about 8 to 10 feet out in front of the section.
So now,
and that's an Omni mic.
An important reminder about that is acknowledging the fact that if you're not in a room that sounds great, you may get frustrated at times. Like, for the home studio guy who's trying to do it, even myself, my studio places I've worked at, you back up and you're like, oh, it sounds so great. And then I'm like, oh crap, I hear the room. So you kind of can't get away with that always.
Yeah. And that, we can talk about the Mank thing because, that was done during this pandemic and we did a full orchestra with everybody at home. So we needed to figure out how to get this sounding good with all these musicians working in their bedrooms.
A full orchestra with everybody at home. How is that even possible?
Exactly. It's a lot of nuts and bolts and a lot of help. So basically what happened is, I got the call from I would say the legendary score mixer, Alan Meyerson, who's famous for, many things, notably Hans Zimmer scores. So Alan called me and kind of told me about this project. And he's like, it's with Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. It's a 1930s period piece for Netflix. It's black and white. They might want to mix it in mono. They're going to age the audio, try to make it sound old. And by the way, there's a global pandemic going on and no one can go to a recording studio. So it was a matter of him saying, like, help me. How do we do this? What do you think? And he had this great idea of like, let's send out period specific microphones to everybody for two reasons. Everybody basically send out, a bunch of old RCA mics, and two things happen there, which is great. One, you get this older kind of classic sound, but two, when people are home recording certain instruments, a ribbon does so much that you want it to do just in the recording. So if you're sitting in an untreated room and you've got a violin and you put a condenser on there, and let's say it's not frankly, probably most condensers in an untreated room is going to sound shrill and harsh. And when the tracks come back for Alan or for myself to mix, we're going to be fixing it before we can actually, do any real mixing. So a ribbon mic in that kind of scenario, and this is true as well of brass at home, will take off a lot of that edge and fix a lot of your problems. Also, the fact that it's figure eight means no matter what, you're going to get some ambience. Assuming your washing machine's not going, then that ambience, even if it's not a great room, will probably be good. And that'll give you something to do, something really good to work with later, as opposed to a condenser, which might pick up so much more of what you don't want. Because the other thing with the ribbon, just the last thing is the other thing with the ribbon is the side rejection.
That's
is your
what
friend,
I was going to say.
right?
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, it's like a dynamic works great too, but with a ribbon, you're going to get more character, you're going to get more color, but then you also get that great side rejection.
Right. So you're not getting reflections off the wall. You're only getting reflections that have made it all the way to the other side of the room and bounce back into the microphone. They're going to thereby sound a little further away, probably.
Exactly. So that was kind of step one, was sending out ribbon mics to all these players. And we did a small group. I think it was, small for us. So I think it was 35 players. So a small orchestra. And basically they all record their parts at home, all by themselves, and then they send in tracks. So whereas normally we would get, 45, 50 mics, that's one pass of the orchestra, we're now getting 35, 40 tracks that are all just individual spot mics that we now have to make sound like an orchestra.
Yeah.
And they're not playing to each other, right? They're all just playing to a click and usually a MIDI mock-up reference track demo.
Mm-hmm.
So the first step that happens is all of that stuff. And we're talking, there's probably 100 minutes of music in that movie. That's all got to get edited to sound like a group playing together. So that's step one, is the editing. Step two is the mix process. And what was fun about Mank was Alan sent me his first cue, which is the opening piece of the movie. And he goes, "What do you think?" And I hit play in my studio and was just completely floored. It's like, this doesn't sound like 35 bedrooms. This sounds like an orchestra playing a Bernard Herrmann score to a Hitchcock film in the 60s.
Yeah,
like,
nice.
how did you do this? And, he had an approach to it that was incredible, and that's for him to discuss. But then as we got into the movie, Trent and Atticus, who, they're the guys from 9 Inch Nails, they approach films differently than a standard Hollywood film composer.
Yeah.
Started asking me to mix cues in a way that was completely different from Alan's, because they wanted something just a different flavor. Normally on a Hollywood film, you'd be like, well, no, it needs to all sound cohesive. Their approach to it was so much like, no. Every single piece of music in this movie is its own thing, as if it's an album. Each scene that we score has a specific emotion, a specific vibe that we want. And we can't just get a setting and run the whole score through it, which was really, terrifying and kind of inspiring at the same time, because it's an approach that's rarely taken. So I can tell you for my part of the movie, the way I ended up mixing things is every one of those tracks ends up going through, it's pretty simple, but going through a reverb, and the wet dry on that reverb is adjusted to try to create a space. Right. And for me, it was my favorite reverb at the moment, Cinematic Rooms from Liquid Sonics. Nice. Which is, so it's basically, you find a hall setting that sounds good, or a stage setting that sounds good on there, and then adjust the wet and dry so that, it's imparting that space to try to mask the fact that these are individually recorded tracks. And then a number of other things that happen in the mix process to make it sound that way. But if you watch the film, it somehow really worked, and it ended up being, the movie's beautiful and the score is incredible. So I got to say, I'm very proud of how that one turned out, and the team we had working on that was like the best in the business.
And we might find that on our TVs right now if we go look for it.
Yeah, that came out last week on Netflix.
Okay, cool. Well, it'll be a little bit later than that when this comes out, but that's awesome. Making sure your vocal sounds amazing in your mix starts with capturing your voice perfectly. This means controlling sibilants and plosives at the mic. Back when I started out, we used to make pop filters out of pantyhose and a wire hanger, but not only did it not look good or smell great, but it also didn't sound all that great either. There's a reason that the Beastie Boys said they never rocked the mic with the pantyhose. Fortunately, pop filters have come a long way in the studio, and Jay-Z Mics brings you the ultimate pop filter, built from solid metal parts that won't break and a flexible gooseneck for easy placement. The Jay-Z pop filter uses a unique waveguide design that prevents plosives from getting through to the mic while letting important high frequencies through for clarity. Get your vocals just right and use the limited time coupon ROCKSTARS to get 20% off the amazing pop filter at jzmic.com. It would be hard to describe in one sentence what gives records a legendary sound, but it would be easy to describe in 3 letters: API. For more than 50 years, API Audio has created large format consoles for world-class studios. Famous for co-founder Saul Walker's circuit designs and the original 2520 op-amp, the sound of API consoles is the sound of great music. API now brings that legendary sound to your home studio with the Box, a small format console featuring the famous API circuitry that is the perfect analog addition to your digital studio. The Box gives you 8 recording channels on the left with built-in mic pre's, high-pass filters, direct inputs, and customizable 500 module slots, and 16 summing channels on the right. Or you can mix using all 24 channels, including aux sends, inserts, and silky smooth faders. API now offers a virtual console experience with a personalized online demo of the Box, 16082 or 2448 consoles. Sign up for your demo now at apiaudio.com. Okay, great. So then the Liquid Sonics plugin going on each track, that's a lot of processing too.
So not on each track.
Okay.
No, all of them. So basically all my strings would go to a single bus, to a stereo bus, because that movie we mixed in stereo. Oftentimes we mix in 5.1 or 7.1 surround.
Mm-hmm.
That movie specifically was, I can't remember actually if it was stereo or if it was LCR. Either way. So the strings will go to one bus and they'll be panned on their sends to that bus. And then on that bus will be processing, including cinematic rooms with the wet and dry dialed in to try to add ambience.
Okay, cool. And if it's a folder track, you can always commit it and come back
totally
and remix it.
Yeah. And that's not a, that's not an unknown trick by any means, but it's a really good thing. That plugin specifically is great for adding that kind of ambience to things that may have been recorded in small rooms without any space.
That's so cool. And it's a really remarkable collection of pieces. A lot of different pieces in that. And we've got that in the playlist Rockstar, so you can check that all out. But it's everything from solo piano stuff. In fact, that was one of the things I had written down, that it had great piano. And I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about some ways to record individual pianos or solo piano. I guess orchestral stuff would be different, but if you're doing this thing where a piano is featured, what are some ways that you like to approach recording a piano or mixing it?
Piano is like, it's one of it's like the great white whale of recording, right? It's such a harmonically full instrument. They can be unpredictable. Obviously there's a funky stereo thing happening that you got to try to capture. Or not. And it's, there's so many different ways to approach it. And there's a lot of ways that are fun. I can tell you my standard, just like 4 mics that I'll use for a piano.
Sure.
Every time are going to be 2 on the inside and then an XY on the outside with the lid up, assuming we're talking a grand piano or a baby grand. And I'll always have those 4 no matter what, because I know if I try something else, I might screw it up, but 2 of those 4 will sound good.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my start. But then the other thing that I like doing, just things I've picked up from watching guys over the years, and it's more of a recordy thing, but it's, there's a lot of piano in film score. So there's a lot of room for experimentation. But I love like an Electro Voice 666, halfway down the sound hole, and you can crush it a little bit. Depending on what's being played there. And it gives you just a super compressed sound that you can sneak in if you want a little more presence.
Mm-hmm.
I've also been doing lately hammer mics. So usually like 3, I've been using the Royer 122Vs a lot. 3 mics in an LCR, maybe 3-4 inches right above the hammers. And that gives you some of that mechanical piano noise that you get. And it can be a really, really beautiful tone.
Now, when you say LCR, you were talking about mixing. Sometimes you're mixing the film that way. Would that allow you to just sort of hard pan these to the mix as well?
Yeah. So I mean, that's a lot of what we do, right? Is so much of what we do in film is 5.1. So that means we have a left, center, right, or LCR, and then we have our left surround and our right surround, and then we have a subwoofer. When I'm recording an orchestra, you've got a Decca tree, which has a left, center, and right mic. Those are going to go to the left, center, and right speakers, respectively.
Nice.
I then have surround mics that are left rear, right rear, and those will go to those. So the image in surround is exactly as it was captured.
Was Decca, now, Decca wasn't invented relative to sound for picture, was it?
Decca, no, I don't believe so.
I don't think so.
Decca was, my understanding of it is it was a technique invented at Decca Studios in London.
Yeah.
Decca was a record label, and they, I want to say it was probably the 50s or 60s, and it was Cam 54s, I think, were the original Decca tree mic. And it's just a way of, it's basically a conductor position miking for orchestra that seems to work really well.
Well, okay, so I love that LCR idea for the hammer mics on the piano. And I know that can be really tricky sometimes when you're recording a piano, listening to it and thinking, especially if it's a jazz album or something, I'm like, I really want a wide, full featured piano thing. Maybe the piano is the focal instrument, but I don't want a hole in the center.
Right.
And so does LCR give us some of that in a pretty good way?
So that's exactly right. And I've also taken to, if I do drums, I almost always use like a Coles mono overhead in addition to my stereo overheads. And basically you can adjust your width by how loud you have that center mic.
Yeah.
And if you screw something up, that center mic will be there to save you. So if you don't have a lot of time, because we don't get to do, this is one thing that might not be known about scoring is we really don't get sounds.
Right.
It's, 10 a.m., 11 a.m., whatever time the session starts, you hit record and you go. And then you dial it in as quick as you can on the first few takes.
Yeah, there was some stuff you sent me in preparation, and two of the words were pressing deadlines.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's, we do immense amounts of music in very short amount of time. So everything moves fast. And if you've got 75 people sitting in a room, you can't say, okay, hang on, violin 1, can I hear you now? Okay, violin 2, there's no time and, no time and no money for that. So therefore there are some mic techniques that I'll put up as contingencies. So one of those is a mono overhead, which I love anyway, because it's such a cool sound. But a mono overhead on drums, if for whatever reason you don't really get time to get a drum sound, and the first thing you hear is that your overheads are not really balanced with their left and right correctly, and all of a sudden you hear your snare is kind of leaning to the right or leaning to the left. If you sneak in a bit of that center mic in a pinch, that'll center the image and that'll help you, Nice. So it's at first a mic that's there to capture the sound and get something really cool. And then it's secondly a backup plan.
The rescue mic.
Exactly.
So, one of the videos that we included is you recording The Handmaid's Tale with a full orchestra in there, and you're sitting in front of a massive wraparound mixing console, and it just looks scary. And so, my question to you is just, is that scary? How does that not scare the shit out of you?
It did. It certainly did. And but it's kind of the reason I say I approach orchestra like drums is, you've got your room mics, you've got your overheads, and then you've got your spots, so to say, which are, obviously your close mics. It's just that multiplied, right? So what you're gonna lean on. You've got on those consoles, you have grouper faders, right? So you've got VCAs. So I'll lay out my console to have a single fader that controls all the room mics, a single fader that controls the string overhead mics, the woodwind overhead mics, and then so on and so forth down to the spots. So I don't have to be running back and forth on a 96 input Neve, being like, okay, hang on, I want to turn up, the bass drum, because there's someone playing a bass drum in the back of the hall. I don't have to run down to the other side of the room to turn that up. I can grab a group fader and just pull that up a little bit. So again, it's really just another version of that track management that ends up happening in Pro Tools later.
Mm-hmm. And I guess if you said everything right, like you said, the dynamic of the score is going to take care of things. You're not having to I mean, people might not even have much in the way of headphone mixes. I don't know.
So the way it works, and again, this is kind of the collaborative part of the scoring stage, which is great, is when you're doing a line check after setup. So before, your musicians have arrived, usually they'll use phase poppers to check mics, right? And you can see, if you do it long enough, you kind of know how loud a phase pop should be on a microphone, and where it should meter. So you can get a basic setting of your mic pre's all the way down the board, because you're right, it is oftentimes 60 mic pre's, which is like, how can you possibly adjust levels all at once? You can't. So then what you have on the stages are these incredible guys that work in the control rooms as your recordist. Sometimes they're running Pro Tools, sometimes they're just there to help you. And if they see that the, first violin is just completely slammed and crunchy, they're not going to ask you, hey, can I pull that down? They're going to step over and they're going to notice it and they're going to pull it down for you. So there's a team aspect to that, right?
That's great.
Which is great, because I can build my mix and any number of my colleagues can go, okay, the trumpets are a little hot. Let me pull those down. Scott hasn't gotten to that yet, dialing that in.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you've got, at all these stages, you have a dedicated headphone mixer. So you have generally the guy who is in charge of everything out on the floor, all the mics, all the headphones, will also have a headphone console. And they can be feeding cue mixes to different sections because, for instance, the percussion, they're going to need more click than some of the other people. And so it's really a team effort, and there's no way it could possibly be done by one person.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of the Hay Bale studio, which I did for 15 years at the Bonnaroo sessions. And what we would do is I would mix in real time a band performing, and there was no way I could also hit all the stuff that needed to happen at the same time. So my assistant, he'd adjust levels, and we quickly learned, it's like, don't ask me if it's cool to bring it up or down. Just bring it up or down. And I just instinctively bring the fader up or down and continue mixing. So it really does work great like that. And one of the aspects to using a digital console, which we did at the end, in fact, we took a PreSonus Studio Live 64S console down there, was the fact that I could be working on it and somebody else could iPad control underneath what I was doing and set gates and levels and stuff like that. So the team aspect is a lot of fun.
Yeah. And I mean, there's, we've got a lot of microphones in a room, a lot of headphones, and we've got a metronome going. So click bleed is a real thing we have to worry about. So that's another person, another job of who's ever doing headphones, is usually there's a fader dedicated to the click, and they'll ride the click up and down as needed.
Nice. That sounds like a good way to do it.
Yeah.
And then on the other end, whoever gets those 150 tracks better have Isotope RX, I'm sure.
That happens as well. Yeah. And those 150 usually multiplied by 4 or 5. So
yeah. And I'm always amazed at how effective a tool like that can be for removing click bleed. I've had it in a vocal mic before, and we went in and took it out. I'm like, how did it just do that?
Yeah, it's incredible. It's incredible for that. It's incredible for what we refer to as stage noise too. You've got a bunch of people out there. Someone's going to drop a pen. Someone's bow is going to hit the mic stand, and you don't necessarily want to lose the performance, but Isotope is great for that.
Yeah. In fact, that was one of the things I mentioned, in Isotope's a sponsor on the show, has been. And one of the things I mentioned was like removing shuffling feet from a choir recording. I was asked to do that, and I couldn't believe it. We did it. It was like rustling paper, shuffling feet. Just get it right out of there.
Yeah. I'm fortunate. I work with a really great engineer named Jeff Gartenbaum. And he's a absolute wizard on editing, isotoping things. And I just like, if something pops up and I'm like, this is a little loud, I know this is going to, Isotope is super easy to use, but I haven't really taken the time to do it because he's so good at it.
Right.
So I'll send it over to Jeff, and it'll come back a few minutes later, and it's like, how is this possible? You've just gone back, like, it's like time travel.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so I love the fact that they got the plugins to make it easy. In fact, I use it on my voice on the podcast all the time, and yours. And then there's also the app itself, which is kind of like what you're saying, which is sort of like the level of learning a whole new DAW to work out of.
Right. Yeah. the audio suite stuff I use all the time, no problem.
Yeah.
I'm competent enough to do that. But the app is, and I'm sure it's extremely user friendly. But I leave it to the professionals.
Yeah, well, remind me to ask you about connecting with Jeff after this, and we'll see if he wants to come on the show and talk about that stuff.
Absolutely.
Okay, so The Handmaid's Tale, one of the songs In Its Time, sounds like there's like overdubs of, like I described it as like bat wings, strings, and backwards pianos and stuff. And then, of course, we've got to move on and talk about The Invisible Man too, because that's just this idea of combining what you think of as an orchestral string recording and just like Foley-esque sound effect,
Yep.
Sound design elements.
So The Handmaid's Tale, which we are assuming the plague we're living in doesn't get worse. We're meant to start doing the 4th season in January. And that's a really fun show to work on because Adam Taylor, the composer, is kind of a true, not to sound cliche, but he's a true artist. And with film composing, you have, I guess this is true with anything in music, but there's kind of that idea between there's craft and then there's art.
Yeah.
And a lot of really, really great film composers, you can say, I need a spaghetti Western. I need this to sound like Ennio Morricone, a John Wayne film. Okay, cool. And then the next scene, I need this to sound like this very lush, romantic European thing. And then the next scene, I need to sound like an EDM record. And there are such incredible craftsmen in this business that they can do that in their sleep. But they might not be doing it in a way that's them connecting with like the art of it. Right. It's more, okay, I know how this is built. Whereas Adam can do a million things, but Adam, to me, always has a sound that is purely unique and purely his own, and it's his own voice. And it's a really inspiring thing to work with because, anytime I've heard anything or worked on anything with him that's outside of Handmaid's Tale, it doesn't sound like The Handmaid's Tale, but it sounds like Adam. And that's a thing that's truly, truly unique and fun, a fun part of my job. So with The Handmaid's Tale, what's been fun is our group is generally pretty small. There have been times where we've had like 20 strings, but a lot of times we do like a violin and 3 cello. 3 celli, I guess, to use the appropriate term. Or we'll do a cello and 3 basses. And
those are called bassy.
Bassy, yeah. Your guess is as good as mine of what the plural is there. But what's fun about that is that show, which is a really, really heavy show.
My next question is it's like terrifying.
Yeah, it's super dark. And what's interesting is like the first season, we got this sound for it, for the orchestra that had all this kind of lo-fi stuff that I brought. I have a couple of old A-static mics and things that you might throw on a drum kit, like just kind of trash mics and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, let's put it on orchestra. It's going to be super fun. And I'm the first to do that. I'll be the first to do that. I'm happy to parallel compress the whole orchestra. Just any sort of record production thing, like let's do it. So we got this really dark sound. And then season 2 kind of got even heavier and darker. Which is, it's sometimes a little tough to work on. Yeah. And then season 3, there's an upturn in the arc of the character and things start really looking up. So Adam and I had this conversation at the beginning of season 3. It's like, all right, let's lose the lo-fi mics. Let's adjust things. Let's start using more violins, less cello. Let's make the sound lighter. Let's put some hope into the score. And so it's fun with Adam getting to have those conversations and apply the emotional aspects of what's happening on screen to something as simple as the mic list,
Yeah, that's wild. I mean, that was my question was it's like the punishment scene, June punishment scene.
Brutal.
It's so brutal and terrifying. And my question was going to be, did recording and mixing a show like that actually affect your mood while you were working? But it sounds like you just said it did.
Yeah, I mean, that's the opening scene from season 2. And it's that was like, I got that, you know, and we'll watch the episode before we start working on it. And that was just like that scene is gut wrenching.
So you're watching the episode with no music in it.
So we'll either watch it with no music, but more than likely what there is there's temporary music that's been put in by a music editor.
Right.
And in TV shows and in streaming shows, anytime you've already had a season in the bag, they have that entire library to pull from. And so what's nice is they'll start temping subsequent episodes with the composer's music as opposed to someone else's music.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, with something like that, and what was interesting is the in that specific scene, there's a Kate Bush song that comes out of left field and comes out of nowhere. And we had no idea that was there. And I didn't see that until the episode aired. And it's just amazing how we get the score, which is very much the sound of the world that is in. And then you kind of have this surreal moment where she thinks she's about to meet her end, and this Kate Bush song comes in out of nowhere.
Wow.
And it's beautiful. And then what happens. I won't spoil anything, but by the end of the scene, the score creeps back in, and we're very much back in that reality of The Handmaid's Tale. And just being on sessions and working on music that does that, I always like kind of visual music anyway. My influences were always headphone records, Dark Side of the Moon, or modern, more modern stuff. Radiohead is a huge influence for me, where you can put on headphones and close your eyes and kind of imagine images to what you're hearing. So being able to work on something that has predetermined images is a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's great. Adam Audio designs monitors with a mission to bring accuracy, transparency, and high definition to your studio, guiding you each step of the way on your journey from starting out in a home studio to installing your ultimate mixing setup in your pro studio. Check out their complete line of speakers and headphones, from the T-Series to the AX Series to their top-of-the-line S-Series, which all use the unique ART accelerated ribbon tweeter design, famous for creating smooth, detailed imaging that lets your speakers disappear into your music. Want to feel awesome to make brilliantly accurate creative decisions in your mixes because you can finally hear your music clearly? Your ears are the greatest instrument you have, and if you can hear the music, then you can mix the music. Learn how to set up your studio monitors and control room for great sound, plus lots of other cool studio tips at adam-audio.com/education.
Mastering is a guilty pleasure. It's been phenomenal to hear a client tell me that the master wasn't just perfect, but it was right. It connected. I love assisting with the mixing process by giving free feedback, just because, if the mix feels some positive impact from my input, frankly, it'll be easier to master. At least 50% of the mastering is preparing the mix. If the mix is really good, most of the mastering is already done. It's much more of a conversation now from end to end. It shouldn't be a black art that's hidden behind closed doors. Shouldn't be a one-shot deal either. Even after the master is delivered, we can still work on it. We can even go back and make mix changes later and update the master for a fraction of the cost. That's the iterative master. I'm Brian Murphy of Sound Porter Mastering. Let's talk about how I can help elevate your mix into the best master possible. Contact me and get free feedback on your mix or a free master demo at soundporter.com.
Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Rockstars of Drums will show you how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Want to start mastering your own records? Rockstars of Mastering walks you through exactly how I mastered my own record using nothing but plugins in PreSonus Studio One. Want to learn how to create a mix that doesn't suck but rocks instead? At Mixmaster Bundle, I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins so that you can have punchy, powerful drums, guitars that rock, bass you can feel, and a mix that is in your face. Plus, it's totally free as my way of saying thanks for listening. Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now and look for the clickable link in the show notes below. Another one that's incredibly moody, another film you worked on, The Revenant.
Yeah.
Now that, it maybe feels a little bit more analog orchestra as opposed to sound design, but still, like, the mood is so powerful.
Yep.
Share a story about doing that one.
So my part of The Revenant was I mixed all of Bryce Dessner's music. Bryce Dessner is the guitar player from The National, and he got called in to help out with the score. So there's three guys who compose that score. It's Ryuichi Sakamoto, and he worked with a guy named Karsten Nikolai. So the two of them were composing, and then Bryce came in and did about 40 minutes of music.
Right.
And he recorded that with, I forget the name of the orchestra, but it's a group in Berlin. And then we mixed it here in LA. And what was fun about that, and with Bryce, it's a similar thing with Adam in that this is an artist scoring something, as opposed to a craftsman scoring something. And I should be very clear that all the best Hollywood film scores, film composers, are artists in their own right. Yeah. They just don't always get the opportunity to share their art. They often only get the opportunity to share their craft and try to impart as much art into it as possible. Yeah. But there's a business aspect to it.
Yep.
With Adam and with Bryce, it's no, this is what they feel and this is what they wrote, and that's it. And what they feel is what you get. So with mixing The Revenant and mixing Bryce's parts of it and his score was great because you're so in tune with the artist's or the composer's connection to what's happening on screen. Mank is another one with Trent Reznor and Atticus. Same thing. They don't approach it like a Hollywood composer. They approach it as an artist who's trying to impart something onto what's happening on screen. So it's inspiring to get to do stuff like that.
Yeah, that's super fun. And just creating music that has such a mood to it. And are you doing a lot of what you do with picture at the same time, so you can see
always
how the mood goes with what's on the screen? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, always. Because with mixing, a lot of what we do is there's a lot of automation. There's a lot of fader rides, and there's a lot of swells, and there's decrescendos. And the thing is, the dialogue, what's being said, always has to lead. I can never get in the way of the dialogue. So I'm constantly listening to the dialogue, and I have that on a fader, and I'm always muting it, unmuting it, and checking it to make sure that's what's happening in the music isn't overtaking the story that's being told.
Right. So you're just mixing the music, but still the dialogue is like a lead vocal that you can't step on.
Exactly. No matter how much I want to sometimes.
Yeah. And meanwhile, somebody else has done Foley, which you may or may not have at that point, and somebody else has done other sound effects as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So there'll be full sound design, and depending on what it is, it might be cars and buses and explosions and trains, or it might be, there is Foley, there's wind and rustling leaves and things. And that, if I'm being super honest, I don't pay as much attention to.
Just keep it down low and save that for later.
It's there. If there's a huge impact, I'm going to make it sound as big as I can, and I'm going to let the dub mixer figure out who needs to win that one. Is it us? Is it sound effects? That's for them to decide. But the one thing that will always win is like you said, the lead vocal, the dialogue. So that I'm always checking and making sure that I'm not, because it's very easy to sit here in my room, listen to stuff full blast, and make this really, what I think is just really an incredible crescendo and musical peak. And if I'm not listening in context, I might be like, wow, this sounds amazing. And then I might unmute the dialogue and go, oh, cool, I just killed the movie, but I felt good about it.
That's how I feel about all my overdubs. I'm like, I was so much going on. And I go, listen, I'm like, dude, what are you doing?
Right. It's like putting that guitar part that you really like just super hot because you're like, this is so cool.
Yeah.
But it's, in context, you need to maybe back it down and relax a little bit.
Yeah. Or I'm just like in context, I'm like, you know what? Just play whole notes and get out of the way. It's much better.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So let's talk about The Invisible Man. So
Sure.
Benjamin Wallfish, if I'm pronouncing that right.
You are.
What an incredible combination of analog orchestra and synthesis and stuff. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of the film Gravity too, the way that the
Sure.
sound, the music in that just was like, it sounded like I don't know. It sounded like I just did one too many whippets all at once, and my head's just going in circles, and I'm about to hit the floor.
Yep. Which is kind of the intention.
Yeah, I'm making that up, rock stars. I'm not speaking from experience. Just saying.
So Ben is, as I was talking about this idea of craft versus art. Ben is kind of unique in that sense, in that he's the best craftsman there is, and he's also kind of achieving the highest art there is at the same time. And he's incredible at being able to take something that could be, let's put up generic suspenseful music here, right? Like, cause you could go watch a movie like The Invisible Man, or Ben did both It movies, and you could totally put in generic horror music, generic suspense music, and it wouldn't be good, but it would work. He's really great at finding concepts for films that push the genre.
Yeah.
That musically push the genre. And, we've worked together for a few years now, and we've got, kind of a shorthand language between us. And it's a really, really fulfilling partnership with him. And every time we do a new movie, it's like, okay, cool. What journey are we going on this time? And with The Invisible Man, and he did a bit of this on It Chapter 2 as well, there is I guess what you would call is this is a weird way to say this, like an organic synthetic thing, in that there are sounds that at times would be at home in like a dubstep record,
right,
or like an industrial electronic record. However, they're being done with violins, and they're being done with cello, and it's just this really, really high level of music production, of being able to kind of mangle things into chaotic beauty that like really, really works well with what's happening on screen. So when you see the lead character is running from the bad guy, it's not just dun 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 dun. There's a shitload of stuff going on, and it's this kind of full on barrage and assault on all your audible senses.
Yeah. No disrespect to John Williams and dun 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 dun.
Not at all.
Because he invented that shit,
Well, you know what? Like, here's the thing though, with that, no one's done it that simply since. Like, no one's taken two notes and made them that scary ever since. Right. It's more a lot of short yet very fast strings over and over and over again. That tends to be kind of the cliche suspense.
Okay, so all these crazy distortions that are in there, those are sometimes analog instruments that are being distorted and affected with your cool mics and in mixing, or
yep.
How did you guys get some of those?
So it completely depends. Some of them are samples that Ben will tweak and do his own kind of pre-mix on, and they'll come in sounding kind of gnarly. Other things, it's during the mix, and he'll say like, let's get more out of that. Like, what can you do with that? And I'll go to, I should, just to be clear, my mixing process is 100% digital. I'm all in the box. I do have a Bricasti reverb, but I use AES, so I use the digital ins and outs on it. So it's all, for the most part, it's plugins, right? And it's everything from like, Decapitator to like the UA Culture Vulture. I've been using a plugin called Valves recently. I forget who makes it.
Do you use Isotope Trash?
Yeah. And they just put out a new version of Vinyl, Isotope did, which I use a lot as well. And then so there's that as far as the mix, but then I'll also do, if we're doing a project like that, like The Invisible Man, I'll put up some more lo-fi mics like we talked about with Handmaid's Tale, but then I'll also do, a lot of times I'll take my left and right room mics and my left and right Decatree mics, and I will parallel them to a compressor while we're recording. So it's just like your classic kind of parallel compression chain, and I'll squash it and I'll record that to a stereo. So I can get this really kind of punchy sound out of strings and out of the orchestra.
So I'm glad you brought that up. I want to follow you on with something.
Yeah. The only other thing that I'll sometimes do is I'll put up usually an XY pair right in front of the podium to get the front of the strings. And I will classic, like distorted vocal trick. I'll crank the mic pre and I'll pull the fader down, and we'll get a fully distorted orchestra sound.
That's
and great. That kind of thing might be useful at times. It might be horrible at other times, but I've got it and I can always open it up and use it if I want it.
So I've got a little bit of trivia for you that you might be happy to discover if you didn't know it already.
Sure.
You mentioned parallel compression as if that was, using that with orchestral stuff was an outside technique being introduced in an unusual setting. Well, Bob Olson, who's one of the early guests on the show, who held every engineering spot at Motown back in the day, he actually said he kind of is this encyclopedia of recording history. He mentioned that parallel compression was actually introduced through classical music. It was a technique for packing more of that dynamic range of an orchestra onto a record back in the day.
Makes complete sense.
Yeah, so I don't remember which one it was that it came up with it, but
I'd always learned it as a drum technique, as the classic thing. And like, again, with like someone like Joe Ciccarelli, who uses it in such a great way, but he uses a lot of it and it works amazingly well. And it's, so I was always kind of like, well, again, I'm going to approach the orchestra like a drum set. And so I put up distorted mics, I put up trash mics, and I parallel compress drums. Why not try it with the orchestra? And on certain films, it gives you incredible options.
And you do it at the recording stage or at the mix stage?
It depends. If I'm recording it and it's, a thriller, a suspenseful film, a horror, then I for sure will do it at the recording stage. Because again, this kind of discussion of all these tracks that we have, if you end up with 1,000 tracks and they're playing simultaneously, I don't want to set up parallel chains for every single different thing, because the other thing to remember about film and TV is I don't deliver a stereo mix or a 5-1 mix. I deliver stems. So while I do print a mix, what I print is individual parts that go to the dub. So for instance, if we have on a score, if we have strings, brass, drums, guitar, and percussion. So let's say, there's generally more than that. And then there's a bunch of synthesizers. Each one of those gets its own mix aux, and then each one of those has its own set of delays, its own sets of reverbs, so that I can print everything simultaneously.
Each one has its own Pro Tools rig.
Each one has its own Pro Tools rig, exactly. Now, if we do multiple rigs, it's generally the orchestra will live on one Pro Tools rig, and then all the non-orchestral elements will live on another. But it's so for me, it's always about like, if I want to get that stuff and we get this sound, I just have to get a fader level on it in the mix. I don't have to reprocess it and have a bunch more plugins going, because system resources in Pro Tools are really, really valuable to us when we have so many tracks.
Yeah. Now, I know another challenge with recording to a computer, and we'll pick on Pro Tools because Pro Tools is usually it. But you can, if you're recording something long form, you can get nervous about running the risk of like, what if it drops out of record? What if there's an error in there or something? When you're doing these dates, I'm sure, that may be part of it is making sure that the computer itself is ultra reliable for capturing what you're doing, but also how long are the pieces that you're recording? Is it one super long session, or is it a lot of start and stops? Is it never more than like a minute or two at a time?
It's all the above. Generally things are broken up, and the score is going to be pretty modular. And I would say on average, we call every piece of music we call them cues. I would say a long cue is 6 minutes, probably 7 minutes, somewhere in there, and that's rare. Most of them are anywhere from like 40 seconds to maybe 3.5 minutes. So it's not like a 20-minute piece, for instance, is not really something we do, just because practically it doesn't make sense, because you generally don't have a scene that's 20 minutes long.
What about The Revenant? Did that have longer cues?
The Revenant had some longer cues, but still not really much longer than your standard film.
It's all based on the scene, however long the scene is.
Yeah, it's all based on the scene. And with a movie like that, what's interesting is certain things might feel longer because of what's happening on picture, right? So like 3 minutes of a car chase won't feel as long as 3 minutes of a kind of introspective moment where the character's thinking and there's these beautiful landscapes. Right. That might feel longer in The Revenant, and therefore the piece of music might feel longer. There also may be less kind of sync points for the music to glob onto. Like it just has to play through the whole thing, versus a car chase, they turn a corner, the rhythm can change, that kind of thing, you know? But yeah, I would say it's generally like song length or shorter.
Do you feel like the time you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for a simple, straightforward, step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover a proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. When you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then get started at ultimatemixingmasterclass.com. Have you ever gotten asked to do a 48-hour film project, sort of like an indie project film, since you've been doing this stuff?
Yeah, all the time.
Say no thanks, guys. I get too busy.
I try to. It's all schedule dependent.
Yeah.
It's schedule dependent and it's music dependent, right? For me, it's budget is of course important, and it's of course nice, and day rate is important. But like, if someone comes to me and they say, "Hey, I have this thing. We have no money, but check it out, watch it, listen to it, let me know what you think," and it's incredible, I want to work on it because it's fun.
I feel like I see that happens in Hollywood. Like the real artists of Hollywood will do projects like that.
Yeah, and it's the bigger the movie doesn't necessarily mean the better the music. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And at the end of the day, we are pumping out a ton of music. But if I have an opening, and it allows me to spend 3 or 4 days mixing a score that was done, kind of out by you. There's stuff that's done in Nashville they're indie movies, and the score might be, mostly acoustic guitar, but it's really good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to be like, I don't want to do that because no one's going to see that movie. I'm going to be like, yeah, I do want to do that because I want to work on that music.
Yeah. Do you have any tips for anybody who's listening who may be about to do a small film project like that, just a short film or their first attempt at something? Any tips on what are the obstacles they're going to run into?
I would say your first obstacle is going to be organization. It's generally a lot of music and there's a lot of revisions, right? So by the time we get to scoring, sometimes a cue is on its 12th revision. Mm-hmm. So it's like, we use dates for when things are recorded, not version numbers. So I would say just a good organizational system is kind of the first thing you're going to need. We certainly need it in mixing to know what's been mixed, what's been edited, what hasn't been edited yet, what's available to mix, what hasn't been recorded yet, etc. So even on a smaller film, just keeping things separate and everything in its right little folder is going to help you immensely.
And now, are you guys using project management software and stuff like that? Is that a regular part of the way you
work? So like with some clients, we'll use Slack because it's a team effort. So just to talk to each other. But the thing that always pops up that everyone uses, it's incredible, is just a Google Doc. Mm-hmm. Google Docs, if you know anybody that's like good with Excel, they can make some pretty incredible Google Docs. So I've got actually a good friend of mine is kind of a financial analyst, Excel wizard. And I always call him. I'm like, all right, dude, I've got 100 minutes of music in this movie. I've got this many blocks and this many cells. How do I click an X to say this cue was mixed, and down at the bottom it'll spit out how many minutes of music I've mixed? And he'll give me a formula for that. So it's just like little time saver progress tracking things.
Yeah.
And it's not the sexiest thing in the world to say like, hey, when you start a film score, make sure you're organized and you have a good Google Doc. But it's so true because you got to make sure the right versions are going into the movie.
Yeah, well, it's a lot bigger than just having the dry erase board and when you're doing a band record and you're like, check on the tambourine for songs 4, 5, and 7.
It's a just deeper, more involved, more moving parts version of exactly that.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are quickly approaching the end here. So let me hit you with a couple of questions on the way out. When
Sure.
you started out, what do you feel like was holding you back?
I would say at the very beginning, I was probably a little like overeager to prove myself before I knew what I needed to know. Which I think some overeagerness is good, but like there may have been times where it was probably, sitting in rooms with people that hired me to engineer and maybe giving a little too many thoughts and tips of how I think the song should go, which I think we all do because we get excited.
Well, you said you called Village over and over again until they finally let you in the door, right?
That's true. It worked for me there. But yeah, just I think it's important to be respectful of who you're working with and what they've hired you to do. Keeping that in mind. If they've hired you to record a drum set, make it sound amazing. Don't comment on, the chord progression unless they're asking you to.
Yeah.
So I think it took me a while to learn that.
Yeah, I struggled with that in the beginning too. And I see that in interns from time to time. And I finally realized what it is. It's the enthusiasm. It's nothing more than extreme enthusiasm for doing this. If somebody didn't care at all, they wouldn't have a comment.
Exactly.
But it's the missing the opportunity to be quiet and learn by not contributing yet. Just soak it all in. Because when you do speak up and offer something like I'm doing right now, you're just trying to show people what you know already. And what's the point of showing people what you know already when you're there to learn?
Right, exactly. And I think it's good to know the difference between those two.
Yeah, maybe one of these days I'll learn it myself.
Same.
All right, cool. How about some of the best advice you received early on?
So I guess one piece of advice that I always fall back on is to value yourself and what you do. There's a lot of people that will ask you to do things, early on for free, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with free if it's a mutually beneficial relationship. Mm-hmm. So, I remember someone came to me really early on and was like, hey, would love to have you mix this song. And, if they use it, then we can pay you, et cetera, et cetera. And it wasn't someone I knew really well. And I remember asking Jeff, the owner of the Village, like, hey, can I use one of the rooms to mix this song? If they decide to use the song, they're going to pay me. And he was immediately just like, who is this person? And he's like, how well do you know this person? It's like, we kind of got through it. He's like, so you're giving them your entire skill set for free with if they use the mix, they'll pay you. And then you'll just figure out how much that's going to be later. The idea was you need to have a certain amount of what you're worth. And that doesn't mean necessarily monetarily. But if someone's going to say, hey, will you do this for free? It's not a matter of what's in it for me. It's, okay, so what are we doing for each other here? I would love to work with this artist. I understand they can't afford my services. So how about, yes, I'll do this one. And if it goes well, then I'll do the next one too. And we'll do the album together, that kind of thing. As opposed to being so eager to take anything, you'll just work for free for, exposure or whatever. So it was really just, the advice was kind of like, it's not necessarily a money thing, but there needs to be a mutual respect. And you need to always value your art and your craft and make sure the person you're working with, unless they're paying you a bunch of money, respects your art and your craft as well.
Yeah, right. Because think about the flip side. It's like if you had said to them, hey, listen, here's the deal. If you guys pay me something right now, pay me some money, and what you send me over to mix is pretty good and I like it, then I might mix it.
Right. right. Exactly.
How far would that go?
Yeah, not very far. So I think there's a lot of that. I think there's a lot of, and it's an easy trap to fall into. And frankly, if you're just starting out, it's good to get some, you got to get some wins under your belt no matter what. And you need some experience. And if someone's just willing to give you some in a mix, great, do it.
Yeah.
But just make sure your time is respected and their time is respected.
Yeah. And a reminder to myself always is the win under my belt may just be the experience of doing that thing, having it suck, and then afterwards going, wow, that sucked. I'm not going to do that again.
Yeah, exactly. Which is insanely valuable, right?
Right.
I mean, there's one thing you're not going to do and a mistake you're not going to make. So every mistake is usually valuable.
Yeah, it's part of your tool chest later for making decisions.
Exactly.
How about an organizational? No, sorry, you already did organizational. How about some tips for the business side of this? So, for those who are listening who want to do this for more than just a hobby, what advice or resources would you offer about making a living doing this?
So, I guess kind of more on what we were just talking about, but it's like you got to pay your rent and you've got to eat, and there's not a ton of entry level jobs where you can be recording for a living that'll help you pay your rent and help you eat. So it's do what you need to do to foster a career in this, and don't put all the focus on the upfront fee. The relationship with your client is going to be more important long term, and finding someone that you work well with and that you believe in their music and they believe in what you bring to their music.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of, to me, been the best business aspect. It's not a traditional business approach, but it's kind of like, for me, I worry about the money second. And the first thing I worry about is how are we going to work together, and is this going to be a good thing musically? Because if it is, and then we can get paid for it, great. But the relationship is the first thing. And, if you've got a client you work with that needs favors here and there, do favors. It's fine. You foster that long-term relationship, and the monetary piece of it will come later.
All right. So here's the last question. This one is hypothetical. We're going to take the Wayback Studio machine. You go back and find young Scott, who is maybe at Berkeley. Maybe you're just heading out to LA to you're trying to get them to answer your calls at the Village. And you walk up and you say, listen, dude, young dude, I've come to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the recording studio yourself one day. What advice would you like to go back and give yourself if you could?
Purchase as much Apple stock now as you can. No.
Go with Bitcoin, man. You'll do even better.
At that point, that didn't exist. I would say, just like, it might be a little cliche, but just be a complete sponge and learn everything you can, and don't assume that something won't be helpful for you. Whether that means learning everything you can musically, that's great. Like, you should learn arranging, learn orchestration, learn to read music, learn all these things. You don't have to do it, but it'll help you. It won't hurt you. But kind of learn everything. Learn about art in general. Learn about literature. There's so many tangential things that you can bring to what you do, and that kind of like expansion of knowledge will only ever help you be a better mixer or a better producer. It'll help you be a better people person, which is incredibly important, maybe more important than anything else. So I guess just, learn as much as you can constantly and never stop.
That's awesome, man. Well, we've learned a ton from you on this podcast, man.
Cool.
Thanks for joining us for this and going for such a long stretch.
Sure.
Rockstars. Yeah. Rockstars reminder, go in the show notes. There's a Spotify playlist. There's video, YouTube playlist there. You can go see some of the films. Really wonderful sounding stuff. Just incredible. Let them know how can they go find you, Scott? Where would you like them to go seek you out online? What if they need to make their next blockbuster film?
Sure. My website is just scottmichaelsmith.net, not .com. That was taken. Can't get the guy to sell it to me. And then social media, just Instagram, which is just like at Scott Michael Smith with an underscore after it. So those two places where you can find me.
Well, I'm really excited because I now have like a list of stuff to go check out. Mank.
Yep.
I hadn't watched it. And I used to be, a Stephen King fan.
Sure.
Reading all his books growing up. So I'll go check that out now for sure. And The Handmaid's Tale. I'm excited to check that out too. And The Invisible Man,
good.
All of this stuff.
Yeah, good.
What did I forget? We didn't even talk about all the records you made. We'll come back and do that next time.
Sounds good.
All right, dude. Thanks so much for joining us, dude. Cheers.
Take care.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who help make this episode possible. Sound Porter Mastering, OWC, Atom Audio, API Audio, Spectra 1964, Isotope, and JZ Microphones. Remember to get your free mastering demo at soundporter.com and use the coupon code ROCK10 at Isotope for 10% off any plugin purchase, or start your 7-day free subscription trial to get access to lots of their plugins. And use the coupon code ROCKSTARS at jzmic.com for 20% off this very pop filter you're hearing right now for a limited time. You will find links to all these wonderful sponsors in our show notes. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars: Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, Hugh McDonald, and John Richardson for additional podcast and video production. You guys rock. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.